I remember I put on worship music and I just kind of fell on my face before God. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. But I remember thinking vividly about the story of David and how he cried for his son to be saved. And I was like, I've never lost a child. I've never lost a child. And this must be worse than that. I mean, and that must be worse than this. That's what I was telling myself. I've never lost a child, and that's got to be worse than this. So God, if you can do it for David, I need you to do it for me, because I just couldn't see how I could do it on my own.
I just don't believe that we were saved to stumble our way through life this side of heaven. I believe that we should respond to His saving grace with a life that glorifies Him in every way, both the spiritual and the practical. Welcome to the SavedTlk podcast. Today, I am actually here with my older sister, Rahjanni. If you guys don't know, it's 5 of us, and she came out first. We're about a year and 7 months apart. Another thing is, in case you don't know, so my name's Giovanni, her name's Rahjanni, clearly, but that continues, so it's actually 5 of us, and all of our names rhyme. So it's Rahjanni, Giovanni, Armani, Liani, and Siani.
Yep. There was a point in our growing up where we were named like Ani 1 through 5, and people would say Ani 1. Do you remember that?
I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
I might have been.
So I was Ani 1 and you were Ani 2.
And I can get how people would do that.
Yeah, because it would get really confusing.
Exactly. But that was always like a topic of discussion when they find out what our names were.
Yep.
I don't know what inspired that, but they just decided to do that. Yeah. So I'm super excited. I'm super excited to be able to have conversation with you.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly this podcast is about a pursuit of health out of a response from the fact that we've been saved. So primarily from a Christian lens, what does it look like to pursue health? And my sister's actually a primary therapist. I know that she is in process. She already took her test, and what is it? The
The LCSW.
LCSW.
Yeah.
Is just waiting to.
I'm just waiting to finish my hours.
Nice,
so
nice.
I graduated. I got my MSW, my master's in social work, and I'm a clinical social worker, and so that's why I took my exam. And now I just have to finish out those hours.
So
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And she did all of that while she was a mom, a wife.
Yeah.
Part of that was while you were still active, right?
No, I actually started. Well, I wasn't pursuing social work while I was active duty. Yeah, I did some classes while I was active duty, but I was still focused on this idea that I was going to pursue federal service, as an analyst or something like that. So. Unrelated to what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. We're going to get a little bit more into that when we start talking about just more mental health matters. But right now, I kind of just want to go back, like
okay.
You're, what are you, 36 or 37?
I'm 36.
36.
Yep.
I'm about to be 35. And time just kind of flew by.
It did.
I feel like the different aspects of our journey makes time go even faster, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's just periods of time that just kind of zoom by. But what was it like, and you can go into the detail, but what was it like growing up with young parents, where we grew up with broke parents, you know what I mean? What was that dynamic,
It was pretty interesting. I have to say, when I think about my childhood, I mostly have fond memories. I mostly remember kind of this, I don't know, exciting chaos. Okay. Things weren't ever quite structured, but I did have a real sense of safety, I think. I never worried, were we going to eat, or am I going to get new school clothes or school supplies. Like I never really had that awareness that we were poor. I think it's probably until I went to high school and I met people who were living well, you know. And I don't know that I knew that I wasn't as a child. Maybe around the time where we'd gone, like we started going to a different church than the one that we were raised in, and they
The cars we would drive, super noticeable. Jeez.
you know, and I do remember that. Now that you bring up the cars, like I do remember the rides to church and being super sweaty, you know, because the windows don't roll down.
Facts.
Oh my gosh, wow, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Well, what about when the pastor, because dad was a youth pastor,
Oh yeah, he said we couldn't park our car up front.
our car was so busted that the pastor requested that we would not park our car where the rest of the leaders parked the car.
Yeah, that's messed up. I mean, thinking about it's like super messed up.
It is.
But as a child, I think like when that happened, I wasn't aware of that. Like I found that story out after the fact.
Yeah.
So I didn't even in that moment, you know, I think that mom and dad kind of shouldered, I mean, what I would consider the embarrassment of being told you can't park out here because your car is so bad. Yeah, I do remember the comments. Like people would make comments to me, like your parents, like they didn't have any hobbies. And I remember those kinds of comments, but I didn't realize until I was almost an adult what that meant.
Mhm.
You know, like I guess having 5 kids wasn't the norm. And so people would kind of like ask like, how old's your mom? And I would say how old my mom was. And then they would make comments like, how many siblings do you have? And I'd be like, oh, I'm the oldest of 5. It was always really a source of pride for me. And they'd make those like, oh, so like they didn't have a TV. And I'd always think to myself, like, yeah, we have TVs,
Yeah.
you know, like super naive. But yeah, for the most part, it was good. There was a lot of pressure though. I remember always being aware of this pressure and like this, like I have to do the right thing. I have to be the best. I have to overachieve. I have to, I have to please whoever is, the authority figure in that, like whatever space I was in. And I think that I maintained that really well until I just got so exhausted that I couldn't. And then I just rebelled. Then it was just kind of chaotic in a legitimate sense.
Yeah, so you being the oldest daughter, there was a different type of like scrutiny,
Oh, for sure.
you know, on you. And I would only assume that it was more so like maybe fear on my dad's part. Like I'm worried about her getting involved in the wrong thing,
Oh, yeah.
mixing up with the wrong people. So like there was this like extremely strict approach to how dad was with you, like
Oh, yeah.
with the cell phone, with just like
Just everything.
hanging out with someone or
Yeah.
going out, you know. And I think that became more noticeable for me. Excuse me, like when I think it was more so like your 7th grade of middle school, 7th grade year of middle school, or 6th grade.
Well, remember we were going to a private school, like a private, like small Christian school.
Yeah.
And I didn't get to public school. I was in 5th grade the first time that I went to public school. I think you were in 3rd grade.
3rd grade, yeah.
Yeah. So, before then, I didn't know what it meant to hang out with, like, I didn't know that like friends hung out together and
Yeah.
they went, like, our friends were all in the church. And so that's all I knew.
Yeah. True. True.
So, you know, that kind of painted like it in my mind, the way that I explained it as a child, if I'm looking back, it's like them and us, like them, like the worldly people,
Yeah.
the heathens, and then us, like the godly people,
Yeah.
you know, the ones that are pursuing righteousness and trying to live holy lifestyles and trying to be representations of Christ. I don't think that we were, at least me, I don't think that I was equipped on how to interact with that world, you know, and not at that age, not going to elementary school or going to public school for the first time in 5th grade. And then, you know, as things started coming out, I remember like having this very real conflict. Like, I kind of want to be like them. Like, they seem like they have a lot of fun. And like, I remember this resentment that I had towards dad, really, because I always felt like the church was a priority.
Yeah.
And I wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that for me was really, really hard, especially as a girl and like seeking the attention of the male figure in your life. You know, like if someone from the church, like at the time, like if the youth needed him, then he was up and gone. And he was tending to them, and he was very good. You know, people loved dad. I mean, I never felt like people didn't love him. At least like the youth
Yeah.
But for me, I felt like I came second to the church.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I came second to the ministry. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I sensed that for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think I did get like the wake up call, like going to elementary school for the first time, hearing people curse, like use curse words.
Yeah.
Like that was like, whoa.
Like they're real bad.
Yeah, like yeah, I was like, what in the world was this?
Yeah.
You know, and then my education was horrible, like, you know, from Grace Christian. So like I was super behind. I think I repeated. They held me back 3rd grade,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken. Then I guess I was legally blind, didn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was affecting me in school, and but as far as like the ministry aspect, I guess I never really got that sense. But me and you were going through very different things, right?
Yeah.
I would say that I wasn't experiencing like challenges like that apart from just getting my behind whooped every week.
Yeah.
You know, every weekend. That was kind of like how he dealt with me. It was just
Mm-hmm.
getting, if I act up, I get a spanking.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, we had different personalities back then. I think that I wanted to be seen as like the mini mom. I wanted that, you know, like I liked that people were like, oh my gosh, Rahjanni is so good at taking care of her brothers and sisters, and Rahjanni is so helpful, and Rahjanni does this, and look, Rahjanni's so mature for her age. Like I really craved that validation.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, like I wasn't trying to buck the system. If they asked me to do something, I just did it, you know, like,
so where did that start? Where like the skipping school, and then,
yeah,
because I remember that was in middle school.
No, I actually never skipped school in middle school. You were in middle school the first time I skipped school.
Oh, I was in middle school.
Yeah, you were in middle school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I went to high school back then. High school started at 9th grade, and
It still does.
okay, but there was a shift because I think either high school started at 10th grade, like something changed, and I was like the first class going to high school in 9th grade. And so I went to high school. I was already young. Like I was already one of the youngest people in my class, and you were still in middle school. And so I didn't have anyone like to hold me accountable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like in middle school, I would see you all the time. And, you know, like if you were fighting someone, I was there, you know, like I was just kind of on my own. And I think it was the first time that I felt like an individual, like I wasn't an Ani, you know? And so kind of navigating that and discovering like my interests that I didn't know that I had because I hadn't been exposed to so many things. I think that was hard. And then like if we discuss, like talk about how strict dad was, I would ask to do things and he would just like straight up say no, like
Yeah.
no explanation, no, like.
But I think that's what I was trying to describe. The difference between my experience and your experience at that time was more so like I didn't have the same restriction you had.
Right.
If I wanted to sleep over at my friend's house, I got to sleep over at my
Right.
friend's house. Whereas for you, it was like just the attempt was to keep you in a box. Really, that's what it felt like. Like
Yeah.
keep you in a box. You know. Whereas me, I wasn't restricted. I just got whooped. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like that
yeah.
was the difference.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, the difference in approach.
yeah, the difference in approach. Like dad never cried when he spanked me, but the
Yeah.
one time that he spanked you, it was like this big ordeal. Like
Yeah.
he cried. Like you know what I mean? I think that was when you skipped school.
Yeah, that's when I skipped school and he found out.
Yeah.
And by then I was already so calloused, you know, like I already started to develop this, like, I don't care, you know? And I think that's why he spanked me. I think that he felt desperate. Like,
Yeah.
my daughter, honestly, I think it's like my daughter's going to end up pregnant, even though I wasn't even almost like messing with anything like that. But I really think that was his fear. And, you know, being in the field that I work in now, it gives me perspective.
Mm-hmm.
One, because I hear so many client stories, but also I understand kind of how your childhood experiences shape you as an adult, right? So, you know, like the older I got, the more I learned about how dad was raised and how the dynamic was in his family and how the women were in his family and those things. And so I could kind of understand, looking back, you know, I could understand where he was coming from. But at the time, I just felt like I was being suffocated. You know, like I felt like my interests didn't matter. Like the only thing that was important was really the ministry. You know, like everything that I did had to be in pursuit of the ministry.
Yeah.
And that was, I just wasn't interested at the time. Like it just wasn't my thing, you know?
Yeah, it's good. So experiencing that point where you just kind of like were calloused, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't care. Do you feel like part of that was callous, but then part of that was also like personality, like a willingness to push against, a willingness to push back, see more?
For sure, personality.
Yeah, because
for sure,
for me it was like if we fast forward, one thing that I that was always clear that I would just kind of observe about you versus me was that if dad told me no, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter what it was. If it was my dreams, you know what I mean? Like I want to accomplish and I want to do this. Dad would tell me no. I'm like, all right, I guess that's not it.
Yeah.
He tells you no, and it's sometimes it's like he didn't tell you that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm gonna do this anyways because I feel like this is what you know what I'm saying?
It's like I wasn't even a part of the conversation, you know? Like yeah, there was definitely that period. Like I think I got tired of like,
because before you say because part of that I wouldn't call rebellion. That's why I'm bringing that up, because I don't believe, and you learn this in psychology, that kids with certain particular wiring, right,
mm-hmm.
that tend to go on to become overachievers,
right,
business owners, they present a behavior that is more one in which they test more limits. It's not them being rebellious.
Yeah.
They are wired. They have this craving for adventure. They want to see what might be on the other side. They're just wired that way. And oftentimes parents don't know how to respond to that. They call it bad behavior.
For sure.
Right? So I've noticed with you, not that I'm not adventurous or ambitious, but I did notice that there was a difference in just the personality and the willingness to be told no, but then be like, you know what, like, I don't know, like I think I still want to, you know?
Yeah. A lot of it was my personality, and I started to discover this part of my personality that was strong in other ways than just like helping around the house or helping with the kids, or, you know, helping wrangle like the kids in nursery during church, you know, I kind of realized that people cared when I spoke, you know, like, and if something was going on, you know, and I was like, you know, like if kids were being bullied in school or something and I witnessed it, which was super rare, but if I was like, hey man, don't do that, people listened for whatever reason. But I didn't feel like I had that same voice at home. And so that was hard, because I was like, man, I'm getting like the validation that I want. My like ideas and my desires for my life and all those things are being validated at school, and people see the potential, but then I go home and I'm like, hey, I want to go to the movies, and it's like a hard no. Like
no explanation, no reason
like
why.
yeah, just hard no. I mean, I have this super vivid memory, like, and we were still, I was in ninth grade, because we were still in the apartment, and I have this really vivid memory asking Dad, hey, can I go to the movies with, like, can I go to the movies with my friends? And I was in ninth grade. I'm about to go to 10th grade. Like I was about to graduate, or go to the next grade. And he just, no. And I remember feeling defeated inside. And I hated that feeling. I hated that feeling. And I think then, and you never realize like the pivotal moment in your life. You don't, in the moment, you don't realize the significance. But whenever like I feel like somebody's coming against me, I go back to that feeling where I was shut down, you know? And I was like, I'll never, no, like I'll never feel like this again. And I ended up going to the movies, and Mom and Grammy went with me. It was awful. It was awful. And that was a compromise. And then from there, like I ended up transferring schools. I went from NMB to Crop. And once I got to Crop, you know, I was very focused on, like, because I was in the magnet program. So I was very focused on the arts and those things, and making sure that I stayed out of trouble enough so that I was I continued to qualify for the program. But I like yearned for the day when I would just like chuck deuces and do what I wanted. And I started doing that. And I remember having a conversation with Mom, and I was like, I don't care what you guys do to me. I'm going to do what I want. And I eventually got kicked out of the house. Yeah. Because you told on me.
Yeah. Yeah, which is so, man, it's, golly, hindsight, right? Hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah.
And you don't understand until you look back.
Yeah.
But it's just, it's interesting, because for me, what started to happen, you know, first it was the wrestling, you know, and really, me and Dad were great. Like when it came to, I was doing well. I was excelling in wrestling. I mean, the only time he would just like really get upset was my grades. I always had issues with my grades. But it was the one area where I would notice he would compromise. Like I would get a D and he'd be like, all right, you're off the team. And like 2 weeks later, he's like,
go back there.
Yeah, go back. I'll be back on the team, you know? Thank God for that grace. But when I started to get involved in ministry, I was 19. And that's when I became a youth pastor at New Beginnings. And we were very like aligned. You know, at that point, like I felt like me and him were on the same page. Because I was just doing everything he taught me. You know what I mean? Like being who he wanted me to be, I was working in pharmacy, which he wanted me to work as a technician in pharmacy. I'm a youth pastor now, you know, I'm pursuing marriage at that time.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow.
All those pivotal markers were the things that he highlighted for me: pastor, marriage, get a house, you know, have a stable job. Those very traditional basic things. And I was like on track, like for all of those things.
Yeah.
You know? I didn't experience that feeling that you described, like I'll never be told no again, until I was like 27 years old.
Oh, wow.
26 years old. when things in my marriage was falling apart, you know, relationships between me and my dad was falling apart. Like we had our differences, like, you know, and it was the first time, like, it was like I started to like crave to think on my own, not think based on what he taught me or what he wants me to do, but like really begin to think on my own. And I started to realize, like, you know, not everything you say is right.
Yeah, that's hard, man. Oof.
Like, not everything you tell me is actually right. Like,
Yeah.
I think about, so you went to the Army.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go to the Army, right?
I didn't know that.
Yes. I was the first person to actually ask to go because of Andrew.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So when Andrew was someone that was on my wrestling team,
Yeah.
we all knew each other. And me being an entrepreneur since I was a kid, he gave me, when he graduated high school, he gave me his car detailing business.
Mm-hmm.
And it was then, I was I think a sophomore.
Mm-hmm.
It was then where he was like, I was like, what are you gonna do? And he was like, oh, I'm gonna go to the Army and do firefighting, blah, blah. And I was intrigued by both, and that's when I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to go to the Army, blah, blah, blah. And then I went into Dad's room and I was like, hey Dad, listen, I want to talk to you about something. I want to go Army. And he said, nope. He's like, you're not going to the Army. He was like, you're gonna pastor at the church.
Yeah, man, that's
and I was like, okay. But yet he told you not to go.
But he didn't tell me.
Well,
I didn't ask his permission.
I don't think. Yeah, exactly. I don't think he had to tell you because you weren't even attempting to. But
yeah,
you know that if you would have went to him and be like, should I do this? I don't think it would have been.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
It would have been a no.
So like, you brought up an interesting point about like my personality just being different, but I still felt like when I had to make a big decision, you know, and this is still like in high school, like thinking about college and things like that, that I had to go to Dad because I did not feel like I could think on my own.
For sure.
I didn't know how to do it. Like, I felt like I had no critical thinking.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time. Right?
That is.
But when I became an adult, I would feel like paralyzed. Like, I can't make a decision without calling Dad first. And
can we pause there?
Yeah,
can we pause there? Jesus, like that, you just put that into words. There is nothing more just like crippling or discouraging to realize as you're getting older that because your dad thought for you in everything, controlled your thoughts, right? Now having to make decisions seems petrifying.
Oh, it was awful.
Petrifying. Like just an example, I'm a married man. And my ex-wife is telling me, wife at the time, but is telling me like, why can't you think on your own? Like, why do you have to go to your dad?
Oh, this is so I was married when John and I got married. Same conversation, same argument. And I would say I'm not making a decision without my dad. I'm not making a decision. And I'm an adult. Like I'd already made decisions about my life and joined the military and you know, had success on my own. And it's like when I came back to Miami, because, you know, I was stationed in North Carolina. But when I came back to Miami, it's like I fell right back into that same routine again. Like even when I got married to Chris, I didn't ask Dad's permission.
Yeah.
Like we just went and we got married. Like
but that's also because you plugged back into the church.
Yeah, probably.
You plugged back into the church.
Yeah, probably.
In the fold of the ministry. So now it's like the way it works is.
Well, I didn't necessarily feel that. Like when I was married to Chris, I was still so heavily involved in.
And you were in North Carolina.
I was in North Carolina, so I was heavily involved in another church. Still longing for my home church, but Chris managed everything. You know, like he owned the house when we got married. He already had like a budget. Like he managed everything. And before that, I was living in the barracks, and so like the military was managing everything. So I went from like Dad managing or trying to manage my life, because I was really trying not to do what he said, you know? I mean, there was a point where I was actively just not doing what he said. Yeah. And then to the military, managing my life and my finances and, you know, like my income and things like that. And then Chris, and he wasn't controlling by any means, but I didn't have to think about any of that stuff because he was doing it. But when I came back to Miami, like I had to buy a house and I had to buy a car, and, you know, like I had just gone through this horrible experience in my life, with Chris passing away. And, you know, we can talk about that as much as we want to, but, it made me question again, like, maybe I don't know how to make decisions. It really created this level of insecurity in me again, where I felt like I had to ask Dad. And I think, for that time in my life, it was really important because I was so volatile and I was so fragile. But I carried that into my next marriage.
Yeah.
You know, like I got back into that. I was codependent.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what it is.
I developed codependency because I was also like in this really deep state of grief. And I just felt like I just wasn't functioning properly, you know. So I carried those habits back into my marriage. And I remember when Chris died, like Dad told me, he was like, you can just move back in the house and I'll take care of you again.
Yeah. And
I remember feeling like Dad loves me so much. I might cry. Like, Dad loves me so much. But that sounds awful.
Yeah.
You know, like that sounds terrible. Like I can't, I knew that I couldn't do that again. And I didn't want to fall into this new title of widow. I didn't want to be dependent on Dad. I didn't want to be back in the house. Not because it was a terrible experience, but because I knew like I wouldn't be able to be who I wanted to be in the house for no reason other than, you know, like I really believed Dad was doing the best that he could. You know, like I never felt like Dad didn't love me or like he was,
or he didn't care.
He didn't care, you know, like he was an excellent dad operating on limited information, limited resources. And so I didn't ever fault him for that, but I still couldn't completely separate. Like I still couldn't like say, okay, well, I'm going to just go look at a house on my own, you know, or I'm just going to make these decisions with my husband, you know? Like I was like, okay, husband, let's talk about it. And then let me confirm with Dad, you know? And I still go to Dad when I need wise counsel, and I still go to him when I need advice. But it looks a little bit differently now, you know, like now I can make decisions on my own and not have to consult him, you know?
No, that's good. That's good. So with that being said, you brought up Chris.
Yeah.
Which your first marriage.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's going back how many years ago?
10.
Wow.
Well, 10 years since he's passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago. So if you don't mind kind of like going into that just a little bit, you know, what you experienced, and then how that brought you to actually being
a therapist.
Yeah.
That's a wild ride too. So Chris was my first husband, and like I kind of mentioned, like he'd met Mom and Dad before. I don't even know if he asked like for my hand in marriage. Like I don't remember any of that, but I know that I did not ask permission. One day he came up to me and he was like, "You're going to be my wife." And I wasn't even remotely like attracted to him. It was so far off my radar. I was dating somebody else at the time, but I remember I loved the assurance. Like he knew he wanted me. Like he was in active pursuit and super confident. And I didn't like, that was a weird thing for me. Because I tended to date people that weren't really sure. You know, like they would say that they liked me or that they loved me or that they wanted to be with me. And then once I was in a committed relationship, then, I don't know, like my ex-girlfriend or my, I felt like second fiddle, again, looking for that validation. And so I would put up with things that I probably shouldn't have put up with, and, things that I would never accept my daughters putting up with, but Chris was like steadfast, and I would say like, dude, you're crazy, like that's not going to happen. But he was right, I guess. And we ended up getting married, and I was still on still deploying frequently. And on one of my deployments, he ended up completing suicide. And it rocked my world.
Now, were there it's interesting, right? Because on one hand you say he's extremely confident.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Life of the party.
Yeah.
Everyone loved him. Yeah. Charismatic.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then he commits
suicide. Yeah, for sure.
Looking back, like what were some of the signs that you saw?
I would say the first sign was probably the nightmares.
I'm sorry, you guys were only married, by the way, when this happened. How long?
9 months.
9 months.
9 months. And I had been deployed. I was on my deployment. So I think looking back, the signs were there, but they weren't clear. Like even like they say hindsight is 20/20. And that's probably one of the big things that I struggled with, is that even when I look hindsight, suicide still wasn't ever an option. Like suicide never came up as an option, like, oh, like that's a sign of suicide. That I would have been able to see clearly that was different than kind of the general culture of the military. So like drinking was always a part of the culture. Being an adrenaline junkie, like he would ride his Hayabusa way too fast. And, one day he came home and he said, he was like, I was going 200 miles an hour down the road. And we had like this really long road right outside at base. And he goes, I thought to myself, if I just let go, I would fly. And I was like, are you nuts? If you let go, you're going to die. Yeah. But that was the end of the conversation. I never thought like, oh my gosh, that's a sign of suicide. I just thought that's one of those like
or maybe he's having thoughts or.
Yeah, no, because it was so uncharacteristic of his personality.
Yeah. Like
even though he would make that comment, it didn't align. Like in my head, there was cognitive dissonance, like between what I believed to be true about him and how he presented. And then what he said, it just didn't align. So I didn't think twice about it. But he would, at one point we ended up going, he started having really, really kind of violent nightmares, and never towards me, but like, one night he was in the middle of a night terror and he was banging his head against the wall, against the dresser. And he woke up the next morning and I was like frozen in bed because people were like, don't wake them up out of their nightmares. And so I was stunned, and he woke up the next morning. He was like, what happened to my head? And I remember feeling like kind of dazed, like, wait, what? I experienced that whole thing on my own. Like I said, you were hitting your head on the dresser. And he was like, what? No way. Right. And now I'm like, I wonder if he did know, but he didn't want to make it a big deal
or face it
or, or have to explain, like where that was coming from. And then the straw that broke the camel's back was one night he woke up in the middle of the night and loaded the shotgun and went on patrols around the house. And I was like, I can't live like this. And his kids were in the bedroom down the hall. And I was like, what if they wake up to use the bathroom and he's not, because I was thinking about like the dresser, like him hitting his head on the nightstand. I'm like, what if he wakes up or the kids wake up to use the restroom and he's not fully present and he doesn't know, and then someone gets hurt? What if he shoots me, And he'd never been violent. I wasn't worried that he wasn't abusive. But I couldn't shake the fact that he said that he didn't know that he'd hit his head on the dresser to the point where it left a mark. And then he goes on patrol. So I gave him an ultimatum and I said, we're going to therapy or ending the marriage. And so we started marriage counseling, and it wasn't because I felt like my marriage was falling apart. It was mostly because I just didn't know how to have a conversation about what I was experiencing as far as these nightmares.
Erratic, like
it was super erratic. The therapist that we were seeing, she told me, she was like, he needs to be seen on his own. And she told me, she was like, I suspect that she said manic depressive, which is now bipolar.
Okay.
That was her suspicion, which kind of makes sense, you know, especially now that I understand the DSM. He definitely would experience periods of mania, like, and they would be brought on by stress, you know. So like when his friend died, and his best friend died the year before, or one of his best friends died the year before he took his own life, we went to the memorial, and then all of a sudden we were at the car dealer, and he was buying a brand new the Ford.
Oh, the F-350.
Yeah. And I was like, what is going on? And then he, you know, like, oh, we should go shopping. And I was like, okay, well, maybe he's grieving. Like, I didn't have any idea. And then after that, it was just like periods of just uncontrollable crying. He would just wake up just crying and crying and crying. And I remember our commander, and I'm jumping around a lot because the memories are just kind of coming in. But when Christina passed away, which was his friend, the commander called me and said, I need you to tell Chris. It was in the middle of the night. I need you to tell Chris before he gets to work. I don't want him to find out at work. Everybody knew how close they were. And he had no reaction. And so I was like, I felt like I was on pins and needles at that point, like waiting for the ball to drop for him to have like this major emotional moment. And it never came. The next thing that we did, we waited a few days for the memorial, and then he was just purchasing things, you know, like cars, and not cars, but he bought that truck, which was probably out of our budget. And, you know, just like random things. And then he was on a high.
What about, like, because this is going back to the last few messages he sent you before he actually did it.
Oh yeah.
About like insecurities that started to show up, or not trusting you.
Right. So while I was in Afghanistan at the time, he started to suspect that I was having an affair. Like, he got this weird obsession that I was gonna leave him, and the way that he was saying it was like I was gonna stay in Afghanistan, which was so absurd to me.
Yeah.
Because it's not common practice to go. It's, you know, it's not like soldiers who go to Korea or go to Japan, and then they, you know, the guys like find the wife, and
yeah.
You don't really do that in Afghanistan. Like, it's not the place to meet people, you know. So it was more distracting to me.
Yeah.
You know, like, I had a hard time staying focused on my job. Yeah, and I needed to stay focused on my job. And so we argued a few times about that, and I was like, you're being ridiculous. And then you know, like, he accused me. He was like, you know, you're gonna basically, like, you're gonna sleep with the command, like the male leadership. Yeah. And I was most of women are minorities, right? So most of the people that you're working with are male. And I just thought, like, that's so, I've never ever been that girl. So I didn't know where it was coming from. And then at one point he'd gone back years in my face. Like, my phone had broken. And so I sent it back home, and I said, hey, can you get it fixed? Because we could connect to Wi-Fi, and that's how I was able to communicate with him. And he went back years before I joined the military. It was 2 years before I joined the military, or a year before I joined the military, and found this letter that another guy wrote me that I wasn't in a relationship with, nor had I even had conversation with since I married him. And he was convinced, just 100% convinced. And that was the only time that I saw him like that. And I didn't even see him, you know, like, this is all through like phone calls or conversations, like on Skype or whatever. And so it was really bizarre. But then I still kind of kept in touch with him, as much as I could, considering the conversations. When we would get on the phone, though, he wasn't accusatory. It was like regular conversations. It was only in writing that he was like that. And then the day that he died, I spoke to him on Skype, and I think it was the first time that I was worried, but still
not worried to the point where you're thinking like,
no. Man, I remember that. I can remember the smell of that day, and I got in. We had like this festival because it was Nowruz, which is like a holiday. I think it's the New Year in Afghanistan, and so I was all dressed like an Afghan, like before the Taliban, the traditional regalia, and I like sent him pictures, and he like showed him, and then I said, I'm free, like, are you available to talk? And so we got on Skype, and he said, you're the last person I needed to talk to. And I was like, huh? And he was like, yeah, like you're the only person that I wanted to talk to. You're the last one I needed to talk to. And now when I say it out loud, it makes, God, why didn't I know? But I just thought, like, there was such a time difference. I assumed that he was going to be going to bed or taking a nap or whatever. And the conversation seemed good. We were talking about taking a trip to Thailand, and like we were going to have a wedding because we didn't have a wedding. And we were talking about like having the wedding, and just, it seemed like we were planning for the future. And he started to get really upset, and I was like, what's going on with you? And he said, my mom called the police. And I was like, why would she do that? Like, that seems so bizarre. And he goes, because she thinks I'm going to commit suicide. And I was like, that was the first time that I'd ever even connected suicide and Chris together. Like,
yeah.
I never thought, before that conversation, I never thought like, oh my God, his mom is crazy, So I said to him, I was like, why would she think that? Like, that's crazy that she would think that. Why would she think that? And he was like, I don't know, because I was so upset. I called her upset and I was crying. And I said, well, Chris, are you going to commit suicide? Like, or maybe it was like, were you going to commit suicide? And I said, were you going to commit suicide? And he was like, no, I wasn't. And that, like, I feel like I should have said, well, are you thinking about it right now? Like, are you thinking about taking your own life, like, right this second? You don't know what you don't know, And then it was super late. It was like 2:00 in the morning, my time. And I had to wake up for my next shift. And I said to him, he said to me, he goes, I'm so tired, Rahjanni, I'm so tired. And I said, well, you should take a nap. I'm so stupid, right? Like, you don't know, And I said, babe, just take a nap. And he was like, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I'm going to go to sleep. And I was like, okay. And then I got off the phone. And then I woke up the next morning. I was dressed because it was a CrossFit Open. And I went and I checked my Skype. And 2 minutes after I'd signed off, he texted me. He sent me a message on Skype, and he said, am I worth... Oh, no. Before we hung up, after he said that he was going to go to sleep, he said, no matter what you hear, no matter what they say about me, know that I love you, and I'll love you till my dying day. And I was like, he's so sweet. And then I went to sleep, and I woke up the next day, ready to go compete or whatever. And I read my messages on Skype, and 2 minutes after I signed off, he texted me, and he said, am I worth all this pain and heartache? And I said, I basically told him yes. in so many words, you know. I was like, absolutely, you know, I love you, whatever. And he was already dead at that point. I just didn't know yet. And like, I remember I closed the laptop, and there was a knock at my door, and they were coming to notify me.
Yeah.
So he was dead within an hour.
This brings back so.
I know, man. I know.
Jesus. I'm like literally fighting back my emotions right now, but it brings me back to the phone call I got like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
I remember the side of the bed that I was sleeping on. Like,
Yeah.
I remember every single detail. And it was Dad. And I knew, like, Dad calling me at 4 a.m.
Something bad.
Something's up. And I literally just like jumped out of bed and I picked up the phone and I'm like, what happened? And he's like, Chris is dead.
Nothing prepares you for that, you know? Nothing prepares you. And it's like, every time I had to tell somebody, I felt like I was breaking them, you know, like bearing that burden of responsibility. I felt like I was destroying people. Every phone call that I had to make, every person that looked at me, you know, with speculation or whatever, or pity. I was like, it can't get any worse than this. You know, that's how I felt. I can't get any worse than this.
So what was that journey like, crawling out of that pit?
Man.
Because there was so much that happened. I mean, Chris ended up taking out that life insurance policy that was left to you, and that caused a ton of
Drama.
strife and drama from his family,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like they were owed part of that or something. I don't know. And you're having to deal with that on top of like trying to grieve, you know, for your husband and not look like some type of, like you set it up.
Exactly. I mean,
it's crazy. Like, yeah.
It's crazy because how do you convince somebody to take their own life?
Yeah.
Right? Without like, I mean, it would take such manipulation and coercion to take somebody who is healthy and then convince them to do that, all the while being deployed.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That never made any sense to me. I wasn't having an affair. They opened an investigation because one of his family members reported that I was having an affair, and that's what led to the suicide. And, you know, they did all the investigations. I wasn't talking to anybody. They, you know, like, whatever. I was cleared. It's illegal to have an affair in the military. There was no wrongdoing on my part in that sense. You know, if I could go back and ask more questions, I would have, you know, like I would have seen things, I think, for what they were. But I remember I got the call, or I got like the notification, and being stunned and crying a little bit, but really feeling heartbroken when I had to tell Mom and Dad. And when I called Mom and I told Mom, she was so confused. I got angry and I was like, put Dad on the phone. And I told Dad, and, you know, when I said it and he understood it, I couldn't take back the pain that I caused him. You know, like when I told Mom, she was in such a daze, I guess, because it was like 2:00 a.m. and they were sleeping. And maybe that was her shock, but I told Dad I just said it one time and he understood one time. And I couldn't unhear the pain that he was trying to hide from me.
Yeah.
You know? So I ended up finding out how he died because they were trying to keep it from me. And so like I did my own little investigation, got mom and dad involved, and figured out how he died. And that was awful. That was worse.
Yeah.
That was worse than finding out that he died. I think at the time I was telling myself it must have been the motorcycle. He got into a motorcycle accident or something like that, you know? But I had to fly from Afghanistan. They got me out within like 4 hours. They got me out of Afghanistan really quickly. But then I had to fly and I got stuck in Germany. So I was in Germany for 24 hours. And I don't know if it was a full 24 hours, honestly, but I know that it was like I was there and then I flew out the next day. Like I went and then I flew out the next day. But we sat down and I'd been holding it together pretty good because Dad told me, he was like, Rahjanni, get it together. Don't fall apart over there. Get home safely. And it's kind of what I needed. Like I needed like someone to jar me back into like, yeah, you can't fall apart. This is not a safe space to fall apart in the middle of Afghanistan. And not just that, but like your team needs you to be well put together. So the ride from Afghanistan to Germany, I was riding back with human remains. So like the floor of the airplane was lined with like the flag draped caskets. And I remember feeling like, I can't believe these people died with honor and Chris is just dead. That's how I felt. Yeah. And I remember I felt so convicted about that. I vowed that day that I would never lie about how he died in that plane, staring at those caskets. I was like, I'll never lie about how he died. And so I got to Germany and I was sitting down eating pizza and all of a sudden I just started bawling. Like it just became uncontrollable, like a river that I'd been trying to like keep restrained, you know, like the dam broke, you know? Okay. And I went back to my room. The person that was traveling with me, because they wouldn't let me travel alone, the person that was traveling with me, she was a godsend, but I went back to my room and I remember I put on worship music and I just kind of fell on my face before God. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. But I remember thinking vividly about the story of David and how he cried for his son to be saved. And I was like, I've never lost a child. I've never lost a child. And this must be worse than that. I mean, and that must be worse than this. That's what I was telling myself. I've never lost a child, and that's got to be worse than this. So God, if you can do it for David, I need you to do it for me, you know, because I just couldn't see how I could do it on my own. Yeah. I couldn't see. And at that time, like in that quiet space or in that safe space in my hotel room, just me and the music and God, I would have never been able to foresee how awful it would get for me. I've never experienced wanting to kill myself, but I remember praying for the rapture. Like, God, I can't do it myself. You know, like I wouldn't do this, like what I'm feeling to my family. But if you could just end things now for all of us at the same time, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
You know, I lost 15 pounds in a week. I couldn't eat. I wasn't sleeping. At one point I was hallucinating. I would like take the mail and go sit out by the tree where he died and I'd like read the mail, you know, and I printed out conversations that we had and I would highlight like I was an analyst, like doing work in Afghanistan. I was trying to solve the puzzle, trying to figure out where I went wrong and what I missed. And like that little detail of him saying I didn't want to commit suicide or I wasn't going to commit suicide. I remember I highlighted it and I circled it and I wrote, he said it in the past and I didn't ask about the present. Like
Yeah.
in the moment, I didn't see it. I didn't realize it. But when I went back to do my analysis, like to try and figure out what happened, I felt like at the time, that's why. It's because you didn't ask the right question. And so that came with its own level
Set
of guilt.
issues. Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. Just disappointment.
Yeah. Yeah, betrayal.
So apart from just like, really pursuing, like seeking God and his comfort, because I think there's just certain things that happen where that's all you can do. It's just cry, pray.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you began to gain more strength by the grace of God, what were some of the just practical steps that you began to take that you feel like began to pull you out of that rut to where you can become more functional again, and just there was a little bit more peace? I mean, stuff like this can go on for years. The healing process can go on, for years. But there's a different I guess response when this is fresh.
Yeah.
It's almost like your ability to just go to work and do this and do that, it's kind of cut off.
So interestingly enough, my coping skill is to be very busy. So in the beginning, I didn't do a lot of grieving. I didn't like that feeling of defeat. We kind of talked about it earlier. I didn't like that feeling. And so what I did is I went headfirst into working as much as I could for as long as I could. 29 days after Chris died, I went back to Afghanistan. Like I wasn't doing well. I attributed the pain that I was feeling I attributed the pain that I was feeling to as a response to Chris's death with the environment. Because I felt like not only am I hurting, but everyone is treating me like I'm the one that committed suicide.
The response of, oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Like walking into a room and everyone stops talking.
Oh, okay.
Or hearing the whispers, like, oh, that's Chris's widow. Yeah. I hated that. I hated that all of a sudden, overnight, my identity felt like it was ripped away from me. And how was I going to know who I was if nobody else remembered who I was, And so I told myself, and I told my command and, everyone that I had to go through in order to get the authorization to go back to Afghanistan. I told them, I have to get back to work. I have to get back to work. I have to get back to doing something that I'm good at. And one of the people that I worked with, whom I respect very, very much, and through this process, I ended up calling him Dad because he was such a father figure in the military for me. When Chris died, I said to him, I was like, Chris chose to die. I didn't. You have to let me live. And so they sent me back to Afghanistan. And so it worked for a while where I could mask it. I could stay busy. I could stay occupied. I could get the external validation that everything was okay because people were saying, you're so strong and you're this and you're that. And wow. Many things. But I wasn't dealing with the nightmares. I wasn't dealing with the panic attacks. I wasn't dealing with like this feeling of impending doom. Like every time the phone rang, I felt like somebody was going to be dead. And that stayed with me for years. I remember once Mom called me. I was in the shower and I went and I saw that I had 2 missed calls from Mom. And I was overwhelmed with this feeling that she was going to tell me that Dad was dead. And I was like shaking. I was having a panic attack and I called her back. And she was like, hey, Mama, what's going on? I was like, what's wrong? And she was like, nothing. What's wrong with you? And I was like, I thought Dad was dead. It wasn't rational. It was just, it was everything that I was trying to avoid for so long coming up. If it doesn't come out, it's going to come up in the most inconvenient and irrational ways, and that's what PTSD looks like. It's the intrusion of the trauma, the intrusion of the thoughts, the intrusion of the maladaptive behaviors and the negative coping skills, and as close as I felt to God, I felt so completely disconnected from my own sanity. And that was also a hard thing to reconcile, because I hadn't figured out how to like live my life every day in worship. So I only felt good when I was actually in worship, like when I was with my music and praying,
So singing songs. And,
yeah, or actively praying, if that's making sense. But it was hard to just be normal, to just be regular Rahjanni, or who I was. I kept trying to pursue the person that I was before my trauma. I wanted to be that person. And then I learned through this journey of getting therapy and seeking mentorship, that I had to grieve who she was, because she wasn't coming back. And I had to learn to rebuild from this new foundation.
Wow. And that you would say took you a few years, but you're still on that journey, or?
No, I don't think it ends. I think that sometimes we look at healing, even if we look at healing like just, from a mental health, oh, she has depression, so she needs to pursue healing. Or she has PTSD or grief. These are journeys. These are things that
For sure.
we go on for a lifetime, much like we pursue Christ for a lifetime, and we may have periods where we feel like we are the closest to God, and we're hearing from the Holy Spirit all the time. And then we have periods where we feel like, man, I'm pressing in and I'm not getting much, what's going on? But it's that continuous journey, like that stretching and that growing process that we go on. Sometimes, at least in my experience, it's felt like that I've endured, like I'm just enduring this thing, like I'm just surviving. So I think that even now there are times where I have to check in, and I have to call a therapist and say, hey, like this has really been coming up. Like when they shut down Afghanistan, that was awful. And it was actually my husband, John, that was like, you need to call, her name is Ingrid. You need to call Ingrid, because you're not okay. And so it's just being honest about where I am in the moment. And I think that the biggest help with that is that I had to release shame. Shame really kept me in a place of brokenness and unworthiness. Like I'm not. If I would have asked the right questions, then, and he would have done it anyway, then I would at least be worthy of feeling better. I would be worthy of happiness. I would be worthy of being in a new relationship. I would be deserving of the way that my life turned out, in spite of. I didn't have a really good picture of grace. I understood grace for other people, but I didn't know how to acknowledge that and walk in that for myself. And it's I find myself sometimes still slipping back and questioning what's happened and how I responded. And this past March was the 10-year anniversary of Chris's death, and it was the very first time that I posted anything on social media about it.
Yeah.
Like for 10 years, every year I would, and for a very long time, my whole life was shared on social media. But for 10 years, I never felt like it was safe for me to share that, because I wasn't comfortable yet. Yeah. I hadn't worked through my own guilt and my own shame and this desperate desire to have him back, which is really difficult, because I didn't want to give up my current marriage and my current life, but I didn't want him to be dead either, So it was like, yeah. What is this weird limbo that I'm in, that I'm not asking for? Like, God, I feel like I'm doing all the right things, but it's trauma. Sometimes it just leaves an imprint on your brain.
What does it look like though to practically challenge, I would say, like shameful thoughts, like what in a practical sense, like how do you overcome, or at least take steps towards overcoming this idea of shame that you kind of hold over yourself?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt says I did something bad or I did something wrong. Shame says that I am a bad person. And largely in part that's connected to I deserve the bad things that are happening to me. I thought that I was just living with guilt, but I combined the two into this like really toxic mesh. And once I worked through that, I could practically, like logically, I think I'm pretty intelligent, and my mind works very black and white sometimes. And so the logical side of my brain could identify the guilt and say, okay, Rahjanni, you didn't know any better. You know, like I didn't grow up knowing about mental health. I didn't study it in school. I just knew what I knew. And then the shame part is really what I had to address, because I always wanted to be portrayed as a strong person. So admitting that I felt like I was a bad person, that's that cognitive dissonance that I talked about earlier, you know, like where things just aren't aligning. I'm feeling one way and I'm trying to tell my brain another thing, or trying to say that I'm another type of person. And I wasn't at the time. I really believed at my core that I'd done something so bad that it stained me, and now I'm a bad person. And I had to tackle that, and I had to one, ask myself, like, why do I care so much about what other people think?
Yeah.
Like, why? Like
That's a big one.
This is my real life experience. I'm not making any of this up. Like this is awful. And no one taught me how to grieve. No one taught me how to be a widow at 27. Like I didn't know any of this stuff. And the decisions that I were making at the time, I believe were a desperate attempt to get back to life, because I felt like I was in quicksand. I felt like every day that I didn't do something that was normal to me, or normal in terms of like the construct of society, that I was falling deeper and deeper into this hole, you know. And I didn't want to be a widow 10 years later. I didn't want to be depressed 10 years later. I didn't want to have PTSD 10 years later. And so I thought that rather than facing it, you know, that I could run from it. And so, you know, I pursued marriage very shortly after. A year later, I was married. And that was a disaster. Like that was a mess. It wasn't a good idea to get married before I'd even worked through my grief or even begun to face my grief. And so a lot of that stuff was coming up in my marriage. And because I wasn't getting help at the time, it just became explosive. I mean, there were times where you had to come and do interventions in my house, you know, and like tell John and I to chill out.
And you would say a lot of that came because you're dealing with these identity issues because of the shame you're holding over yourself.
For
and
sure.
At the same time, because you care so much about what people think about you, now you're trying to quickly cover it up.
For sure. 100%.
So where would you say that I have my own personal view on where some of that comes from, like just caring so much about what other people say about you or what other people think. Where would you say that? Because that's a learned behavior.
For sure.
That's a learned behavior. But where would you say that you got that, like, I guess, way about you where it's like you always cared about what other people thought about you, how they looked at you, X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I mean, the earliest memory is in the church. Yeah. And honestly, you traumatized me when we were children.
Go ahead, elaborate.
So the first time that I can remember caring about what people thought about me was a day that I felt the most beautiful. And I might have been 5, but I was wearing like this like white lacy dress, and I was wearing these white patent leather shoes that had a little heel. and I wasn't allowed to wear high heels, you know, but like dad made an exception for these tiny little heels, and I was clanking around the house, and I got to church and I felt so beautiful, but I had had chicken pox. And the lady, like it was like a man and a lady at the door, and they welcomed us, you know, and this is at Grace Christian. And you were like, my sister has chicken pox on her private parts.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Jeez. That was cool.
It was awful. It was awful. And I remember feeling, I mean, I'm over it now, obviously. But I remember feeling so embarrassed and immediately not pretty. Like immediately I felt like kind of dirty. Like, oh my gosh, not only do they know their secrets, but you didn't get chicken pox so bad. Like, why did I get chicken pox so bad? And that kind of identity continued throughout the church because I was a pastor's kid, and everyone in church is paying attention to what the pastor's kids are doing.
Yeah.
And so I continuously throughout my childhood and teen years felt scrutinized for not being like enthusiastic enough or having a bad attitude because I have a really strong personality. And no one taught me or acknowledged the strength of being assertive. They just, you know, oh, she's a brat, or she's stubborn, or she's bullheaded, or she's mean, you know, she doesn't like people, like those kinds of things, which genuinely I didn't feel until people started calling me out, you know? And then I started feeling that way. So I've always been very aware of what people thought about me and the impact that had on me. Because I would use performance as a way to get over or mask pain.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to be the person that was hurt. I didn't want to be hurt.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to be so Christian and so strong that I got to bypass that.
Yeah, it's and I think it just kind of runned in our family.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was doing in my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Like I refused to be seen as a man that, number one, has to get a divorce.
Yeah.
Number two, is seen anything other than a man that has like a successful marriage.
For sure.
Because that was everybody's impression.
Yeah.
Like everybody, oh man, I want, you know, my daughter to marry a man like you. You guys have an amazing relationship, blah, blah, blah. Have you? I know what's going on on the inside, you know, and there's just this immense fight and desire to keep that covered up. Yeah. Like no one can see that.
It's a shame.
Yeah. No one can see that. But it's shame. But again, it's a learned behavior. It's part of your ideology. I'll give you an example. So Dad has said many times, me and your mom broke the curse of divorce. Yeah. So you guys are never going to experience that. Yeah. So imagine being told that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've heard the same.
As a young person, you know, a young husband, and thinking, okay, they broke the curse. So what does that make me? Yeah. If I end up getting a divorce.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get it.
You get what I'm saying? So it's or the idea that if something wrong is happening in life, it's because you're doing something wrong.
That's a big one.
It's because you're in sin.
That's a big one.
And that's not life. But when you have these belief systems and these things are embedded in you from a child, yeah, you will do anything at all costs, even if it's destroying you, to hide that what you held as truth at that time from coming out. Yeah. Because that would be a shame.
It would.
No, you know what I'm saying? Like, it would be a shame.
For sure. It's tough. I mean, I look back at my childhood and I look back what I went through, and I have kids now. Or John and I don't have my kids on my own. John and I have children now. We adopted Preston after almost 7 years of fostering and going through that process. And there's so many things now I do differently.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's like when you know better, you do better.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like I never thought that I would raise children without spanking them.
Yeah.
And I've never spanked my kids. I just won't do it. You know, it's just not an option in my life. And there have been times where I felt like I was like, okay, I'm going to take this little one out. I'm going to take them out, you know, because they're so fresh or so opinionated or defiant sometimes, you know, like children have this really uncanny way of believing or behaving as though the entire universe revolves around them, right? Yeah. But I felt convicted, and I can't explain it any other way. I just felt convicted when I had Preston, and I thought to myself, like, he's been through so much. How could I possibly spank him?
Yeah.
How could I possibly hurt him?
There was a different level of grace that you had, or patience.
Yeah.
And it's not that you didn't discipline. I want to make that clear. Like,
No,
she doesn't just let her kids. They're actually
not
very well behaved.
They're good kids.
Yeah, very well behaved. But her approach, in my opinion, it's because I'm not against spanking, but I'm not for what spanking is considered as a norm, right?
Right.
Most parents that spank, they spank every time they discipline. Like, it is their normal thing. Like, oh, you do something wrong, you're going to get a spanking, like, to stop the behavior. Whereas you learn that, like, no, that's not what spanking was meant to do or be. Like, because even studies, proven case studies show that when you predominantly spank your kids and hit your kids, it leads to a long-term result of their behavior going the other way. Like, it doesn't bring positive results. Whereas I started to come around parents that are very slow to put their hands on their kids or spank their kids. And what they do is they actually have conversation. Yeah. They verbally express, hey, this is why your behavior, or this is why you shouldn't have this behavior. Like, they would sit down and talk versus like trying to extinguish. It's really a lazy way of responding as parents, trying to extinguish the bad behavior, so they just hit you. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, like I don't know that mom and dad ever said, like, I don't feel like disciplining my kid another way. I don't know that they knew how to discipline their kid their kids another way.
Considering their experiences in the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the immediate response is to curb the behavior. So there is that sense of satisfaction. Not that, wow, I hit my kid. I'm not satisfied that I hit my kid, but I am satisfied that, okay, the behavior stopped. Yeah. Right? But spanking can also produce really good liars. And I was sneaky. I started doing everything that I wanted to do without getting caught. And then I just stopped caring about the effort that it took to be sneaky. And I just kind of became brazen with my behaviors. And I can't say that it's because, you know, I was jaded from spanking, but I just didn't have an understanding. You know, I felt like so much of the parenting was through fear. You know, like, if you don't do this, catastrophe. If you don't do this, catastrophe. If you don't do this, catastrophe. And I was like, well, if catastrophe is going to strike, I might as well let it strike while I'm having a good time. You know, like that's kind of the attitude that I developed. Where now in my relationship with my kids now, I want them to understand not only their behavior, but also their emotional response to the behavior, right? Like,
that's good, yeah.
You're behaving this way not just because your brother hit you or because your brother took your toy, right? Maybe you're frustrated. Maybe you didn't eat enough. Maybe you didn't sleep enough. Maybe you feel left out. You're embarrassed. You're,
good, yeah.
You know, like putting names to these things. And the kids are pretty good about it, because they'll come up to me and they'll say, I need attention. Mommy, I need attention. I need you to hug me, or I need a cuddle, you know? And it could be in the middle of a meltdown, and they'll say, I need you to, you know, help me calm down, or, you know, I'll do like a guided meditation with them where I'm like, okay, pretend like you're on the beach, and, you know, just so that they learn how to self-regulate, because I felt like some of my emotions weren't expressed. I bottled a lot of things up. And the ones that I did express, I felt like they weren't well received.
Yeah.
So, you know.
I think that kind of, just like hearing your story and seeing like the different journey and where you are now and how you're thinking now, I think it highlights God's grace.
Oh yeah, man.
And how you can grow up kind of behind the ball.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's how I felt often. Like,
yeah.
like the way we were raised, I was kind of behind the ball, you
mm-hmm.
know. But then yet God will allow you to go down certain paths, certain journeys, knowing, may not all feel good, but knowing that you're gonna learn what's necessary to begin to be able to live well and surpass, you know, a lot of the I guess hurdles that we grew up with.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's awesome to see, you know, how God is gracious and without us even knowing,
mm-hmm.
you know, without us even knowing, God was strategic in our lives.
Absolutely.
To take some of the situations that we experienced, whether good or bad, and use them to mature us,
mm-hmm.
you know, so that we can begin to change the legacy, you know.
Absolutely.
And instill the right values and morals and ways of living, you know, in our children,
mm-hmm.
which is a great gift.
Yeah. And our parents get to witness that.
Yeah.
And that's a great gift as well.
Yeah,
you know, like
sure.
we have parents that love radically.
Yeah.
And now it's fun to watch my parents love on my kids. Yeah. You know, and to see that and they don't have the pressure of having to raise them. And you know, I don't know what it's like to raise 5 children living off of a food pantry. I have no idea what that's like. Yeah, for sure. I couldn't imagine experiencing that level of stress. And you know, God is just, he's been so faithful in our lives from the beginning. It's hard to ignore that. Yeah. You know, it's hard to, I can't deny his existence. I can't deny the hand that he's had on my life and on my siblings' lives, and on my parents. So, you know, to God be the glory.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
Thank you
so much. We're definitely going to do this again because there's so much more.
I know.
we can actually cover in more of a specific senses, especially parenting styles. I think that would be a great conversation that we have on the podcast.
For sure.
There's so many different views. But I appreciate like your vulnerability, like your willingness to go back and talk about some of the very difficult things that you've experienced. And hopefully it's refreshing for a lot of us listening to be able to see how God is so faithful to pull us out of these situations. Like there's nothing that we go through that puts us in a permanent state of hopelessness.
That's right.
Christ.
That's right.
You know, some of the darkest situations, I feel like we both can relate to this, where you feel like there's no
way out.
Mm-hmm. Man, God is faithful to bring us out.
That's awesome.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Love you.
I love you.